Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel. My name is Dennis Medbury. I am the author, award-winning author, I could actually say now.
Bravo.
I keep forgetting about that. I am a writer of a fantasy series called Secrets of the Runestones, and that's why I chose this panel, because I'm a writer, and I really like anything to do with writing, and I love to discuss the common things that people talk about or do in writing, and discuss how we feel about those different things. So today's subject is whether or not to use tropes, to trope or not to trope. But before I get into that, I would like my fellow panelists to, thank you, David. I would like my fellow panelists to introduce themselves and tell them about who they are. So let's start with Allison.
Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Rieger Cook. I write under the pen name A.R. Cook, to make it simple. I am a young adult fantasy author. I've written the Scholar and the Sphinx series. I'm also in the middle of a high fantasy series called The Scale Seekers. My most recent publication is a short story that came out in an anthology last month called Women of the Woods. This is sort of fantasy horror stories. And right now I've actually switched to screenwriting as kind of my current focus. I recently placed in this year's Austin Film Festival for a script that I wrote.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Cecilia?
Good morning. I am Cecilia Dominic. I am a USA Today bestselling author of steampunk and urban fantasy. So I'm more in the urban fantasy side of things rather than high fantasy. My best known series are probably the Ether Psychic Steampunk series and the Lycanthropy Files, which is now spun off into the Fae Files Urban Fantasy series. And by day, I'm a psychologist. And so I really enjoy thinking about how other people think, including about writing and reading.
Wow, that's really a psychologist. Wow. All right, no analyzing any of us, okay?
That's okay. I don't work for free and it's too early.
That's a Sunday morning at a con.
I know. It's like, does anybody else feel like they have conned all weekend, even though they have not conned?
Yeah, well, the fact that, yes, we are actually like doing something, that we're getting out there and talking to people, it feels weird.
Yeah, it is. The whole thing is pretty strange. I prefer in face, of course, but you know, you do what you got to do. And I'm glad that we at least have this. You know, it's great that at least we get to talk and have these conversations that I think are helpful for a lot of people. So, I made a list. If we can bring that up. Now, this is just a little list that I came up with off the top of my head. It's just the most common ones that I could think of. It's far from a end-all be-all list that talks about every trope. And I threw a lot of these on here because some of them are kind of old, or at least don't relate to what is, I guess, popular in the stories that we're reading nowadays. Like the size means power trope. The big guy is always the strongest guy. I think we've moved away from that because I see a lot of stories with smaller main characters that are just as powerful as pretty much any of the other characters, or bad guys wear black. I don't know if that's so much a trope anymore, but there are ones that are very relevant to today's stories, like teenagers. That's a big one. The reluctant hero, and like the Mary Sue. But let's start with just one and talk about it. Cecilia, do you see one in here that you'd like to talk about, or just off the list?
So I think the idea of the chosen one is really interesting because I've been seeing that, of course, a lot lately in urban fantasy as well. And, you know, that kind of goes along with the reluctant hero a lot of the time, which I think is interesting because the reluctant hero, of course, is sort of the start of the Joseph Campbell hero's journey, where the hero is called but doesn't necessarily want to go on the journey, whether it's, you know, a high fantasy journey itself, or in urban fantasy, whether it's more of a quest to get rid of some sort of bad guy or evil force. So I'm kind of curious about what you guys think about those, and also what our commenters think about those. I mean, do you guys like them? Do you use them? I admit I have definitely tried to shy away from the chosen one trope. Like, I'm working on a series now with a character who could very easily go in that direction. I'm like, no. I am choosing not to use this trope.
All right, let's take the list down. Cool. Oh, there we go. So yeah, I'd love to start with the chosen one. You know, this whole con is mostly about Harry Potter, and we know that Neville Longbottom was the chosen one. So,
of course.
That's not part of this discussion. But I personally, when I wrote my story, no, I wanted to stay away from chosen one. That was one trope that I personally didn't particularly care for. I think I was just burnt out on it. I think that would be my biggest explanation for why I didn't go that route. And I'm not trying to, and no way are we, any of us, saying that the use of a trope is bad. A lot of these tropes are unavoidable, really. No matter what story you read, it's bound to have at least one. But I personally don't particularly care for the chosen one, just because, like I said, I'm just kind of burnt out on it. What do you think, Allison?
I see why it's still used in stories. In fact, what was I just watching yesterday? Oh, Moana. It's like the ocean chose you to do this, even though technically the ocean could have done it itself, apparently, because it has its own mind and could have saved the day on its own. But I think people like the concept of, because, you know, when we read a book, we often put ourselves into the feet of the main character somehow. And we kind of like the thought of there are special people out there. I am ordained to be special, possibly. You know, so I think people do like the concept that they're somehow, through fate or destiny, we're chosen to do great things, which of course, on the other hand, it kind of takes the agency off of you to go out and do great things. I will say that in my stories, there are, like in Scale Seekers, the main character is sort of a chosen one. She was chosen to inherit a certain power, but then has made the choice to not do anything with it. She doesn't like having this power. She's never figured out how to do it, because even though she inherited it, nobody showed her how to use it properly. So she's exiled herself out to the desert. It's like, even though I'm the chosen one, I choose not to use this power. And then, of course, other circumstances throw her into a separate adventure. But yeah, I think that's why the chosen one stays here today. Even the most recent reboot of Mulan, she has, I guess in this version, she has higher chi than everyone else, so she's sort of a chosen one in that sense. But yeah, I think it's just because people want to say I am destined for greatness. That's something outside of my agency.
There's a story that I'm familiar with. I don't know if anybody ever watches any anime, but there is a story, a very famous one called One Piece, and they took Chosen One in a totally new route when they did their story. First of all, I would recommend this story, but it is enormous. They're approaching 1,000 for titles, so it's, you only get into that one if you have a lot of time. But anyway, there was in the lore there was a character that was all famous. He was called the Pirate King, and at the beginning of the story, he's dead. And you're led to believe that the main character, at least in some way, you're led to believe that the main character may be the Pirate King's son. And then later on, we find out that he is not the Pirate King's son, but the inheritor of his will. Now, I liked that. That was like I'm taking it in a new direction. Like, instead of being the direct descendant or the direct person who's supposed to be the chosen one, he's the inheritor of another man's will. And I thought that was interesting. Okay. And by the way, 5 points to I lost it. I can't scroll. David, I think it was.
5 points to Ravenclaw.
Woohoo! I made sure to wear my blue today.
Cecilia, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And somebody made a really good point in the chat. I think it was David. You guys give him points for it. That, yeah, tropes are useful because it gives people a point of reference. So they're able to hook into the story easier because they know what to expect. And, tropes make it easier on the reader, but also then harder on the author, because then it's like, how do I take this and twist it and make it original? So the example you just gave was I think a good one of how somebody went through and did that. It's like they took this expectation and drew the reader in, and then we're like, oh, nope, but it's really this way.
Right. Well, actually, subverting expectations is another trope, right? We see that a lot in stories where the author leads you one way and then
Yep.
Right, which isn't always received well.
Yeah, it's not well. It really isn't. It really isn't. Can we think of any examples of where that happened?
Oh, I've got a personal one. So my first book, The Mountain Shadow, which has now been retitled as The Wolf Shadow, I took the werewolf trope and made it more of a psychological sort of thing. So, and yes, I feel like a supervillain sitting here petting my cat. So basically my werewolves, it's a genetic disorder. And the ones who were not born with it or who didn't have it activated until adulthood, they have a harder time shifting in and out, including mentally. And so, typically in werewolf novels, especially in urban fantasy werewolf novels, they shift smoothly and they're able to go from animal to human with no problem. And in my first book, one of my werewolves, he shifts to human, but he's still very much an animal brain. And he does something that a lot of readers really objected to. But, for me, it made perfect logical sense. And for people who are actually paying attention, it made perfectly logical sense that he would do this because he was still very much in protective wolf mode. So my first reviews, Library Journal was a really good one, but then I got one from Romantic Times that was just terrible. And I was like, oh, so yeah. Pro tip for those of you starting out, if you are going to subvert the tropes, try not to do them too extremely because people will object. However, other people have come up to me and told me they love that series and they like the original take on werewolves. That appears in so many of my reviews. It's like, this is such a nice, refreshing way to look at it.
Okay. Do you have an example, excuse me, Allison, of a subversing an expectation that went wrong?
Well, I think this will count because I was just thinking about this movie this morning in terms of tropes. And like I said, well, usually when you're watching something like a musical comedy, you expect a happy ending. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking about the 1986 Little Shop of Horrors movie. Mm-hmm. And if you've ever seen the cut of the original ending, which is pretty close to, like, it's in the stage musical, the plant wins.
I was going to say, like, the stage musical.
Right, yeah, no, everyone gets eaten, the plants take over the world, and this whole ending cost, like, well over $1 million to shoot. Because it was huge, they miniaturized the whole city of New York to have these giant plant puppets come out and destroy everything and rip through everything. And it was this really awesome ending. And then test audience went, this isn't happy, I hate this. Mm-hmm. So Frank Oz went back, and that's why the happy ending is really, really quick. I mean, Plant dies, Seymour and Audrey go off, get married, live in their pretty house, that's it. Here's your happy ending. This is all the budget we have left.
I didn't know that. Honestly, I didn't know that at all. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, if you go on YouTube, the original ending cut is there now. And like I said, it's really impressive. And I bet in today's audiences, they might accept that ending. But back in the 80s, like, no, give us our happy ending, please.
Oh, of course, in the 80s, yeah, it would have been.
Right, well, or like
acceptable. I think it probably would have been a little bit more acceptable today.
Right.
But, Hannah, you are asking for me to just go ahead and give you the whole soundtrack, so we'll just go ahead and move on. Da doop.
Little Shop of Horrors was named after the title. Oh my goodness, yes. Suddenly Seymour. I'm just going to throw out, the first one I can think of, but there's so many.
I did think of another one where I think it was very well received, was the ending of The Matrix. I personally didn't mind it. I did think that program, the master program guy, did kind of go on and on, but that was one that was not very well received. So I think it was just so, look, there has been hundreds of, or however many chosen ones, and you're just another one, and you're going to fail too. And people didn't really receive that too awful well. I personally was fine with it. Can we pull the list back up, please?
Somewhere that's green, you'll be a dentist.
Okay, I've got one. I I've got one.
Time.
And they're related. I'm gonna go with damsel in distress and masculine heroines. Okay, we can bring the list.
Yes.
Okay, now I realize that I am the only male in the panel. But I actually have very strong feelings about this. I do have a wife. I do have 2 daughters. So the whole you need to be a masculine to be a strong woman is absolutely ridiculous. You can be feminine and strong. Those 2 things go hand in hand. What was the other one? It was
Damsels in distress.
Thank you. That I'm done with that one personally. Well, these are all personal opinions. Don't get me wrong, and I don't think there's anything wrong with a story that has damsel in distress. But when it's like the main thing, it's like, okay, I feel like that should have ended with 1989. How do you 2 feel about it? Let's start with Cecilia.
So, do you guys remember the Cinderella-based movie that starred, I think it was Drew Barrymore back in the 90s?
Ever After?
Ever After, yes.
Oh,
and how
After.
refreshing that was, because she freaking rescued herself.
Yep.
And I think that was maybe our first or an early twist on that damsel in distress from our Disney princesses to princesses that rescue themselves. Now we have that more. If, for example, in the first Frozen movie, I haven't seen the second one. So yeah, I am happy to see these particular tropes die. But again, it's something that you can play with, where maybe it's somebody seems like a damsel in distress, and you're going along through the story, and it's like, oh, I know how this is going to end. And then, but there are clues that maybe she's not quite so damsel-y. That's totally a word. And so, that it gives you the opportunity for a good twist at the ending if you can keep the reader going or the viewer going. But thinking about that and the masculine hero, have you guys read Gail Carriger's recent book, The Heroine's Journey?
No.
Oh, absolutely must read for authors and I would say readers, because she argues that this super masculine hero in the hero's journey, that's only one option, and then the other option is basically a cooperative hero or heroine who is essentially Harry Potter, because he accomplishes everything that he does with the help of his with the help of his team.
Right.
And so I like that way of looking at it as well, is that it's flipping that trope on its head, that these stories have always been with us, we just haven't recognized them.
Yeah, I think one of the first examples of at least starting to get away from that trope was actually that I could think of is Princess Leia. Like she was a strong female character. She once they got her out of that cell and they were trying to fight back those stormtroopers, she's like, "Just give me a gun, I'll show you how to do it." And I think that was great, especially for the time, because I do believe that happened in 1977. So that was, and then it got real bad in the 80s. Like that was every story was about some big muscle guy trying to rescue some princess. It got real old real quick, and I'm glad that we've moved on. What do you got, Allison?
Well, I think the point about a cooperative hero versus a standalone, I'm going to do this all myself hero is interesting, because about to say, if you're going to be a do it all alone by yourself hero, there's the assumption that then you have to be super strong, be the 10 men that you are cooperating with, be it one man army. And what real particularly gets me about like what is considered a masculine hero or heroine is being stoic, like having no emotion because I'm an impenetrable fortress. I don't let anything get to me. Like, no, we all feel something, and it's only interesting to watch if you feel something so that we can feel it too. So that's the one thing about the trope that always bothers me, is like this hero that reveals nothing. And,
Yeah, I agree. I hate to do the shameless plug, but in my series, I do the point of view of a character changes per chapter, and I have several characters. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but when I started writing, Clarissa, who is one of the main females, is I had a whole plan for what was going to happen to her, but as I wrote and I wrote, I actually fell in love with her. She's a strong female character, very feminine, loves her feminine ways, and I ended up changing the entire plan with her because I fell in love with her. She's a great character, and she goes through some stuff, but we won't get into that. Can we bring up the list? Try to tackle as many of these as we can in the next 15 minutes.
Oh my goodness, yes.
All right. Let's see. Allison, can you pick one out you'd like to talk about? Wait, did I do that with you first, or I can't remember? I lost track.
I don't think so.
Okay.
The one, well, we just talked about heroines a little bit. I thought the evil for evil's sake is interesting because I'm actually a little torn on that one sometimes.
Okay. So, in my opinion, with the evil, what's this? Yeah, that's a great one, David.
Oh, Buffy, yes.
Yeah, Buffy's a great.
Yeah, Buffy was a the whole premise is just turn the trope on its head.
Yeah, yeah, it really did. She was a tiny little thing too. Nothing masculine about Buffy, but anyway, except when, no, she really wasn't. Anyway, the evil for evil's sake, I think there is a place for it still. I know that as writers, we want to make everyone relatable. I think that's what made in the Avengers movies, what made Thanos so great was because although you didn't agree with his plan, you understood where he was coming from, and that made the villain so much better. But to say that evil for evil's sake should just be gone, I kind of disagree with that. What do you think, Cecilia?
So, if you've read or taken any of John Truby's courses, he's a Hollywood script doctor and advisor, and seems like he's one of those behind the scenes guys that's had a hand in a lot of what we've seen, but we haven't actually we don't know him. He has this interesting way of thinking about villains as being 4-point oppositions. So whereas you have maybe one main one, there are others working with them. And so I can see evil for evil's sake in an organization like that. But, I honestly have a hard time identifying with a villain who is like that. And, I like to have a villain where even if they're doing something horrible, as long as they believe that they're doing something important or something good, then I can get into it a lot more easily. So, maybe they could have a henchman who just wants to be bad. Or maybe the main bad guy just wants to be bad and they have henchmen who are doing things for their own reasons. But I think it needs to be part of a complex.
I agree. Real quick, 5 points to Chris. Very good. Agree with everything you just said there. 5 points to Hannah. And I agree. Thanos is one of the best villains I've seen. What do you think, Allison?
Well, to me, it always depends on the story. Because, sometimes you have a much more complex story where you want to understand the villain's motivation. You may even want to be a little sympathetic to them because we've all been in a bad place at some point. And then there are just stories where you just want the villain to be defeated and killed off. And it's like, I don't want to feel sympathy for this. I want my climactic big battle scene where the sword goes through the, bad guy's face. So even as a writer, as I'm writing a story, in fact, I was writing a screenplay where I intentionally, the villain begins to give you a hint of what he's been through. But no, I want this guy, I want his ending, his defeat to be really satisfying. And I don't want people going, oh, but he was not that bad. He had a reason for what he was doing. It's so no, I wanted this guy to just get his bad, his ending. So I actually kind of held back a little bit. So there's a hint of what he's been through, but then he intentionally pulls back and says, no, I don't want to change. I don't want to be redeemed. So it depends on the story. It depends if you want that villain who seems more well-rounded, or if you just want the villain that goes bye-bye at the end.
Sure. Just because you do a story one way or the other doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's all everybody's different. Everybody has a preference. When we look at the Joker, originally the Joker was evil for evil's sake. He just the embodiment of chaos and destruction, and he was incredibly interesting because of it. So it's not like you can just because you have a evil for evil's sake villain doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. Of course, the newest Joker movie did kind of flip that on its head a little bit because now we understood where he was coming from and all that. But anyway, can we bring the list back up, please? Here's one that I'd like to discuss: elves and dwarves, and we're running low on time, so I'm gonna get in a minute. I want to give our guests in the comments a chance to throw out a trope that you'd really like us to discuss. Actually, do that now, and we'll come back to you. But okay, elves and dwarves. Is it done? Is it overdone? Are we sick of it? What do you think, Allison?
Well, it's interesting, that specific one. A couple of years ago, I did an anthology with 6 other authors, and it was solely about elves and dwarves. Those were the only characters we could use. Well, actually, you could throw in like a human if you wanted, but the whole premise was like write a story just about these two groups, and they've been at war for 200 years. And on the one hand, I mean, it's a classic trope of fantasy. Mm-hmm. You immediately think fantasy when you see elves and dwarves. Yep. But that should also be what solely defines the character. I mean, I thought all those stories were fantastic, and they really used those particular characteristics of elves and dwarves in new ways, even like in ways like, oh, I haven't read a story where elves were depicted like that, or dwarves did this. So I think there's still a place for it. I know, like I said, I know people will immediately go, oh, this is a Tolkien-esque type world then that we're living in. But like I said, there's always something fresh to bring to it, and the race does not define the character all the time.
I completely agree with that. The usefulness of using the elves and dwarves is good, because when I say elf, most everybody gets the same picture in their head. When I say dwarf, most everybody gets the same picture in their head. Probably Gimli, but I'm good with it. I use elves and dwarves, and 5 points to Dan, because I agree. Throwing in a new take on it, and what you said, like one of my friends when I was writing my story suggested that my elves be cannibals. I did not go that way, but anyway, yeah, that would have been interesting. Like, oh well, that's a totally new take. But what do you think, Cecilia?
I agree. I think it's one of the beauties of tropes. It's that everybody has these expectations, and with the elves and the dwarves, it gives you a little bit of a shortcut when it comes to culture building.
Yep. Because
they all have these commonalities, but then it gives you a great jumping off point for how to make them different, or how to make the characters unique and original.
I don't know. I am not familiar with Drizzt.
Oh, Drizzt. Ari Salvador? Mm-hmm. I'm going to mispronounce the name, but they're underground elves.
Oh yeah, dark elves, right? The Drow. Is that correct?
Yes.
Someone tell me if the Drow is correct.
Pretty
sure.
Anyway,
I don't want to spend too much time on it, because I'd like to cover as much as we can in the next couple minutes, and I don't see anybody bringing up anything they specifically want to talk about. So can we bring the list back up, please? The Mary Sue. Can we talk about that one for a minute?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know about you, but when I think Mary Sue, the very first person that pops into my head is the new Star Wars girl.
Rey?
Yes.
Ray of Light. Rey.
Yeah. Is it Ren? Is that right? Yeah. Wow. She just Trope Dead Parents. That's a great one. 5 points.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to cover the Mary Sue for a minute, man, Ray got all these abilities, like with no training, like all of a sudden. And if you watch that one scene where she's with Luke Skywalker and she's just hacking away at the boulder, it was the worst fighting stance I've ever seen. And and we went from, okay, she's got terrible stance, she's just hacking away, leaving herself open all over the place, but all of a sudden she's like this great Jedi master. And oh man, did that take me personally out of the story. What do you think, Cecilia?
I honestly have not seen any of the new Star Wars movies beyond The Force Awakens, so sorry.
No, that's okay. I just talk about the Mary Sue idea.
Yeah, I admit I had to look this one up once you popped the list up as we were talking beforehand, because I wasn't familiar with the concept. But yeah, I agree. If somebody's going to have some sort of superpowers or great abilities, they need to develop them. You know, even if that development is referenced in the story, not necessarily shown. And yeah, they have to have a purpose.
Yeah, I agree. The powers out of nowhere thing feels cheap, and it kind of takes you out of the story if they didn't earn it. What do you think, Allison?
Well, as soon as I saw that trope on your list, like, oh, that might be the trope that bothers me most of all. And it's either whether it's a Mary Stu, or I believe the male equivalent is Gary Stu. Mary Sue, Gary Stu. I
call male. I always thought of it as a gender neutral term.
That's true. Yes, and it can be. But yeah, the whole point of wanting to take a character is only as interesting as their flaws. So to have someone perfect out the gate, and there's no room for them to grow. This whole point that we're watching a story is we want to see the characters change and grow into better people. I mean, why am I watching something that's just like this the whole time? I can't.
Good point.
Yeah, and listen, you can't identify with somebody who has no flaws, because we all have flaws. So yeah, it's the most grating trope for me.
I agree. Allison, can you lead us off with the dead parents trope?
Dead parents. Oh my goodness. Because immediately I think of Disney films, and that they're still doing it today. And I get why it is a trope. The idea of, especially if it's usually it's a younger protagonist than in this case who loses a parent, leaving the innocence and comfort of childhood and being thrust into the real world. And for most of us, that really doesn't happen until your parents are gone. Then you're on your own. You don't have a safety net to fall back on. And in fact, I believe the whole idea of Disney films having dead parent, usually a dead mother, is because Walt Disney lost his own mother fairly early on. It was like right after Disneyland opened. And that always affected him so badly that this kind of just became a theme in a lot of his movies. He felt so guilty about losing his mother. And I forgot, because he just had moved her closer to Disneyland, and he just felt really heartbroken about her passing. So
yeah. Cecilia?
Yeah, I agree with what Allison said about it's a nice way to put the character out on their own and force them to grow up very quickly. However, I also see it as an avenue for lazy writing for some people, because if you have parents who are alive in the story and the story takes place over enough of amount of time, you're going to have a character interacting with parents. So it's a good way to keep your character number low, and but you're also perhaps missing opportunities to show the characters and what they're what they're dealing with in regular life, and perhaps a little bit of where they came from.
Right. In Luke Skywalker's case, his parents were dead, but yet he comes to find out that his father is not dead. So that was a way, in essence, to get away from that particular trope, because that really launched the plot. And David, 5 points, because that one is actually on my list. A magic item that solves everything.
A MacGuffin.
Yeah.
MacGuffin. Exactly. That is a MacGuffin. MacGuffins can be good, like if they're done right, in my opinion. like you have the Infinity Stones, MacGuffin all day long. Did they solve everything? No, they were the focal point. So in that case, I liked that, and there were a whole lot of problems with the Infinity Stones. And we are getting very low on time, so I really can't get too much further into it, because I guarantee you that the three of us could go on with this particular topic for at least another hour. But before we close out, I do want to give everyone a chance to plug themselves one more time. So let's start with Allison. Can you tell us some of the things you've written and how people can find you?
Absolutely. I've written the Scholar and the Sphinx trilogy. I've also written the Scale Seekers series I'm currently writing. You can find all those books on Amazon. And my Facebook and Twitter handles are AR Cook Author. You can find me there too.
Okay, I'm actually writing this down. So, go ahead, Cecilia. Tell us about you.
Sure. So you can find all of my books wherever books are available. So you can grab them in ebook from pretty much all of the major ebook vendors, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Google Play, Kobo. You can also get paperback copies from the major vendors. You can ask your bookstore to order them through Ingram Spark. You can also find me at CeciliaDominic.com, Twitter Cecilia Dominic, Facebook Cecilia Dominic Author. And again, I write urban fantasy and steampunk.
Didn't you say something about you writing a high fantasy?
So my third Fae Files book, they are actually in the land of fairy, and it is more like a high fantasy quest.
And
so it's that one's currently my NaNoWriMo project. But the first two Fae Files books are out. They're called The Shadow Project and Shadows of the Heart.
I'm very interested in that one. I'm going to get that one when that comes out. That one in particular to me, because of my particular taste, just rang for me.
Excellent.
I am the rookie in this group. I have only written one series. It's Secrets of the Runestones. It is only 2 books in. Third book, I'm nearing the end of my first draft. I can be found DP Medbury or Dennis Medbury on Facebook. DP Medbury on all the other ones. I'd like to thank everybody for all the commenters for
thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
It was great, and thank you, Allison and Cecilia. And
thank you,
everybody. What's most important? Enjoy the rest of the con. All right. Yep. Thank you.